Oi pessoal, estamos aqui com o David. A gente vai fazer umas perguntas com ele sobre o impacto das redes sociais na saúde mental dos alunos.
Hi, I'm Dave. I teach high school social studies and English for over 10 years.
So David, how do you think that social media has influenced the performance and focus of students in class?
Well, that's a tough question to unpack. There's pros and cons of social media for students. Their performance in class, I feel like overall it can be said it's like a slight negative because a lot of students are focused on the social media and being popular versus academic use. Social media used for academically is a good thing. I've seen, for example, students joining WhatsApp groups, and then they can change ideas freely, right? Talk about their ideas or in class, right? And after class through WhatsApp. That's great. But then you have social media where I've seen this happen where students are recording other students without permission and then making memes out of the students or cyberbullying the students, right? And that can take a negative effect on the students. The victim of the students can face a lot of self-confidence issues, right? They're worried about what's happening in social media versus their academics in school, I could give you an example before the cell phone ban. I taught in a middle school here in Brazil, in Rio, right? And I was teaching this project, English project for the students, and there was two students that deals with depression and anxiety. And all of a sudden I see one of my students, she's like crying. I'm like, why is she crying in the middle of my class, right? I'm like, oh, what's going on? And then she talks to me and she's like, I can't do anything in class today because a girl recorded her in a different class and then they're just bullying her, and I had to stop the entire class and let the administration know, and then they had to take the girl out of my class to give her support. And then they had to pull out the students that were bullying her in my class. So then my class was like 30% empty.
Yeah, empty, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God. So obviously that's a negative with social media, right, in class, because it can disrupt the flow of the class and the learning in the class. Another example of how social media could be a negative thing is with sexting. Especially teenagers, right? Boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, right?
Yeah.
They'll send nude pictures to each
pictures,
other.
yeah,
Right. And obviously, everyone's happy, right? But when they break up, negative things can happen, right? So I give you another example. In a different high school I worked in. We had, cheerleaders, right? And I had a cheerleader in my class, and then she was like crying. I was like, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh, her ex-boyfriend, posted a picture a nude picture of herself online, right? And then she was telling me, like, all the boys in that school, they created a website to put all the ex-girlfriends on this, like, website, yeah. So, and it started out with social media because it was done through Instagram, like these nude pictures.
Yeah.
And then eventually when they broke up, I guess the guys got mad or whatever, upset, and then they started creating this website. I think it was in the dark web. I've never seen it, but we had to get the police involved and also the administration of the school system involved to try to stop this problem. So a lot of girls ended up suffering because they had pictures of themselves online, and we had to teach the girls, like, and the boys not to send nude pictures of themselves because this is what happens, right? But at 13, 14, 15 years old, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about, oh, this relationship is gonna last forever and that blah, blah, blah. but they're thinking about the moment and not thinking about the repercussions, right? So when this thing was posted online, a lot of the girls would not show up for class until the school did something about this problem, you know. So, and that can affect the students negatively academically because they're worried about their social well-being versus their studies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you think social media has changed the way that students interact with teachers?
Social media obviously changed the world and also in education, right? Because now it's kind of like, almost like when email first came out for adults, right? Always have to work. So social media for students, I feel like, and teachers should not do this, and they should not obligate the students to respond. You know, it's up to their choice outside of the classroom. Because like I know there are teachers that use social media with their students so that they can continue working on, I don't know, a project or some type of work in class, right? So that it's never ending, right? So for example, teachers create this group for their class, right? And after class, they finished up the work, but the work's not 100% done. And back in the old days, you would just continue to work next class. But now because of social media and the teachers creating these groups, the teachers will use social media to ask students to finish work, right? Or ask questions. And social media is good in a sense that I think it's good to use when students are in a group and they can exchange ideas. But I think it's not a good thing when teachers expect students to continue their work after class. Because if every teacher does this, that means the student won't have any time for anything. Yeah. You know, they're worried about their class. The teachers are worried about their classes, but teachers also have to think about the students' lives, right? Maybe the student is taking extracurricular activities. Maybe they play basketball, football, music, right, after school, and they can't do all these extra activities, right? So I think that students are being burnt out by social media and by all this extra work.
And how do you think it affects the teachers as well? Because
I think for the teachers, they think it's, and this is because I'm a teacher, but also I was a director, so I see how things are in both levels, at the teacher level and at the director level. So at the teacher level, I think most teachers, they think it's a good thing because they're like, oh yeah, you know, we want to educate the students more. We want them to know more. We want them to be more critical thinkers, right? And there's only so much they can do in a classroom because there's only 45 minutes or 1 hour in a class, right? So I think for teachers, they're like, oh, this is actually a good thing because we can have students complete the work and then we can move on to new work, right? But from the director's level, right, so that's the administration level, I think that's a bad way of thinking because you're overwhelming the students with so much work. Because if you have one teacher that thinks that way, that means you might have 4 other teachers or 5 other teachers that think that way. And then you're giving so much work for the students, you know, that students might be burnt out and it can affect them mentally and physically. So, yeah. And for me, as you know, as a former director, I always care more for the well-being of the student. You know, and it's great that students like learn more and all this, but you want to make sure that they can handle the work and if they have time to do the work. And more, I remember when I first started teaching, and social media was up and coming. You know, it's not like now. I always remember like students, they would go to sleep around 11 p.m., you know? But now I hear students, they go to sleep around 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, this is not good, you know? Like, and then they got to wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning. That's not healthy in the long term. And I think a lot of it deals with the extra work, but also social media as well, right? It could be work related, but also could be entertainment, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think it's taken control of the student too much. And the student, and it's not just the student, but it's also the teachers, the administrators, the parents, they have to figure out how to control social media for students under 18, right? So that their child and their student student can make sure they can get enough sleep and be healthy, right, mentally and physically, so that they can work on schoolwork, right? So, yeah.
And do you notice any difference in behavior or performance between the students who have social media and those who don't have?
Okay, so this is interesting. In my experience, I feel like the students that don't have social media or uses social media very limitedly, they tend to do better academically, just because they're more focused, right, on their work. And the students that tend to not have social media, they tend to be more individualistic, meaning like they like to work by themselves or work by one other person, with maybe one other person. Versus like students that have social media and work through social media, they could be in a group with 10 other students, Mm-hmm. And then you have students sometimes, some students work harder than other students, right? And it takes more time to complete the work. Versus some of the students that I know that don't have social media or have limited use of social media, they're more focused on what they need to finish and complete their goal or their mission or whatever it is. So I feel like students that have lack of social media, they tend to do better than students that use social media on a regular basis. So, yeah.
And how do you think the teachers can deal with this new dynamic in class without completely forbidding the usage of social media?
All right.
Like we did in Brazil.
Okay, you're talking about the cell phone ban?
Yeah, but how do you think you can deal with it without completely?
It's so hard. It's so hard. That's like the age-old question.
Yeah.
Whether to have cell phones or social media in class or not. Or both, right? You have it in class, but you can control it. But the problem is to have social media or cell phones in class, if you allow it, it's hard to control it. Because every teacher will have a different policy of how to use cell phone in class or social media in class. So in my opinion, it has to come from the top down, meaning it has to come from the administration, like the principal or director, and they have to tell the teachers how to use social media. Because the problem is if the teachers themselves try to control social media or cell phones in class, what's going to happen is like the student will go to a different class, right? So for example, if there is like a small amount of time that they can use social media in class or their cell phone in class, right? Maybe they're researching something, right, for an essay, right? And the teacher will say, oh, you can use your cell phones, right? And then the next class they go to, the teacher will say, oh, you can't use your cell phone in class, right? Or, and then what happens is then the students that will have their cell phones and they'll try to sneak it in class and try to use it anyways. And then the teacher that won't allow cell phones use in class, right, the students will start to complain and say, hey, my other teacher let me use a cell phone in class. Why can't I use it in class, right? So that's the problem. If you allow the teachers to control the cell phone use in class, you're going to hear complaints from the students because students are going to say, oh, you're not giving us enough time to do this, to use our cell phones. While in my other class, the teacher let me use the cell phone all the time and it's no problem, So it has to be from the director telling the teachers how to use it and it has to be consistent.
What was the most successful approach that you have seen in a school?
All right, so are you talking about The
related to
students,
social media?
okay,
Like,
related to social.
yeah, coming from the director or.
It's tough. I mean, but are you talking about like using social media or the students' academic level beating,
No,
reaching a
no,
potential?
using social media.
Just using social
Yeah,
media? Honestly, I don't think any system has it correct, because I think if administration have tried a lot to use social media in class, and it's just so unsuccessful. And every school's different, and this is why these bans of cell phones started to happen at the federal level or at the state level. I think first they allowed it, but then no one can really control it, and the use of social media can cause a lot of problems like cyberbullying,
yeah,
right? And this is one of the huge reasons why I feel like the cell phone ban came into place, was because of the cyberbullying, but also, you know, with the social media stuff, there's also a lot of cheating, right? So like people join these groups, these WhatsApp groups, and students are like changing information of like for example, I give a test, right?
yeah,
And most teachers will create one or two tests in the same day, right, for students to take. If a teacher only creates one test, right, and I give it to, like, you're my student, right, and you're using social media, right, and you took my test, and 10 minutes later, you're in the WhatsApp group, like, hey, Dave's class, this is the question he's going to ask for, blah, 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 all this, right? And so the next class that's coming in, they already know the questions I'm going to ask, you know, or that's on the test, right? So I think that's also one of the reasons why there was a lot of cheating involved, and also a lot of the cyberbullying. And I think that's the problem. It's so hard to control social media in class, you know, because there's usually only one or two teachers in a classroom, and how are they going to watch what every student is going to do, right, in class, right? Maybe you have 35 students in a class, or 30 students, or 20 students. It's so hard to look, right? Because if you look one side, another student will just take out their cell phone and whatever, you know. So it's so hard to control, and also I think this has becoming a problem, was students started recording teachers, right, and making memes out of them, or maybe even bullying them. Yeah, exactly,
stickers.
right.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a huge problem, because teachers started to feel insecure to teach in their own classroom, you know. So if you know the answer, it'd be great. I think no one knows the answer of how to use social media in class. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not to use it inside the classroom, but maybe outside of the classroom, as far as like, oh yeah, this is like reminders, you know,
Yeah.
or exchange of ideas. But to use it inside the classroom, I think there's a lot of more risk for the education.
Then reward.
Yeah, than the rewards, you know. In a perfect society, people wouldn't like record teachers, people wouldn't cheat, right? But people are people, you never know, right? So, so there's a lot of positives and negatives, but I think there's more negatives on that.
And what do you think is the role of the university or school in teaching the healthy use of social media?
Well, ever since the advent of social media, or the rise of social media, schools have to take it seriously, right? They have to set a policy, and it has to be top down, meaning coming down from the director, principal, then down to the teachers, and then eventually down to the students, right, and parents. So the directors and principals, they have to figure out the best way to use social media, and then they have to educate the teachers on how to use it and be consistent with it, whatever policy or rule that they set, so that the students will know how to use social media in class or outside of class, right? And the parents have to be informed too, because if the parents are not informed, they'll start complaining and say, hey, you know, how come we didn't know about this, you know? So it can't, for a long time, the directors and administration and schools, they gave that power to the teachers, and they said, hey, you decide on how to how to use social media in your own class. But like we discussed, that becomes a problem because students will complain like the amount of time they can use social media in class or their cell phones in class. You know, like they'll go from one class to another class and say, hey, how come, I don't know, this other teacher will let me use my cell phone, but this other teacher don't. And then the student will complain to the parents, and then the parents will complain to the school, right? So this is why it's more important that it's the school itself or the directors themselves, they set the rule, whatever the rule might be, and everyone needs to be consistent with that rule or policy.
So you think there is a big inconsistency?
Yeah, it's a big inconsistency because I feel like a lot of the administration, and then in many schools they don't want to be.
Take it.
Yeah, they don't want to be responsible for that because they don't want to hear parents complaining. Right? Because if they set the rule, and if parents and students start complaining, they're not going to complain to the teachers.
Yeah,
they're going to complain.
Yeah,
it becomes
their fault, right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's a hard policy to create. Because the problem is if they create it and then you hear a lot of complaints, then they risk their jobs, right? And maybe they lose their jobs or they move to a different school, and then the school has to find a new director or something like this, right? So, but I think for it to be successful, it has to come from the top bottom, But I think this is why it's so hard. A lot of administration, they don't want to be responsible for it. Teachers, they don't want to be responsible for it. And this is why I feel the government was like, okay, we're not going to allow cell phones in schools. That's the easy answer.
Yeah. And now it's the government's fault. It's not.
Yeah, and then how hard it. Yeah. So then all right. So I'll tell you an experience from New York. It became the government fault, right? First in New York, the mayor was like, no cell phone use in school. And teachers loved it, the schools loved it, the students and parents didn't like it. So what happened is, after 4 years later, the mayor said, hey, we won't let cell phones in school, the parents voted against that mayor.
Wow.
And they got a mayor that allowed cell phone use in school. And that's how it became political, at least in New York.
Crazy.
So then they allowed cell phone use in schools in New York for a long time. And then it became a problem. Right, the cyberbullying, the cheating, the inappropriate relationships between teachers and students, right? And it became so much of a problem. The parents became so much of a problem again that parents voted against that mayor, and cell phones are not allowed in schools anymore. So it became a political problem because now. Schools didn't want to take responsibility, teachers didn't, the government did, and now it's a political problem.
Well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Luigi, for inviting me for this interview. I hope it helps you in your research out.
Thank you.